155 years ago, slaves here in Texas heard they were free.
That day is a special day in our lives because you know, we done come so far.
For the next half hour, we'll celebrate Freedom Day with a look at a slave-founded town right here among us in Harris County.
And education is such a key element of seeing progress and change. So we'll talk about what we're learning and maybe teach you some elements of history that you didn't know.
It means that it's recognition that we really are citizens here in this country, and we should not have the hardships that we currently have.
Tonight is also about what's next, looking ahead to reparations in this country and the impact it will have on Black America, plus the move to make Juneteenth a national holiday. Our Fox 26 special Erase the Hate starts right now.
And it was on this day in 1865 that American lives changed in Texas in a way that is still being felt generations later. And it all happened just up the road from where you might be sitting right now in Galveston, because today is Juneteenth.
Although Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, it took a long, unbelievable stretch of months for the news to arrive in the port of Galveston. And when General Granger and crew arrived in Galveston for that purpose on June 17, 1865, the African-American labor team on the wharf found out the reason for this ship's arrival and started rejoicing.
He and 2,000 federal troops sailed into Galveston Harbor, and from the Osterman building on June 19th, General Granger issued 5 general orders.
I would draw your attention to General Order Number 3.
General Order Number 3 alerted the slaves of Texas that they had been freed 2 years prior.
This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves.
The general's troops then marched here to the Custom House, built in 1861. They read the 5 general orders again.
All slaves are free.
Well, Galveston was the major port on the Texas coast, and the news was read here. From Galveston, the news was just disseminated out to the rest of the state.
My great-grandparents had been enslaved and were living on Bolivar, on the peninsula across from Galveston, and that when they heard of the proclamation of freedom, that made a huge difference in that they were able, my great-great-grandparents, Horace and Emily Skoll, were able to come. I can only imagine that it was a combination of exciting and perhaps a little scary, venturing into the unknown. It was obviously a change of a major transition that was happening as African Americans were finally discovering that the Emancipation Proclamation had been read over 2 years earlier. So it was a time of opportunity. It was a time of hopefulness.
What does Juneteenth, aka Emancipation Day, aka Freedom Day, aka the Black Independence Day mean to me? To me, it means that I get to walk around this country free, owning the things that I want instead of someone owning me. Power to my Black people, and power to the people who are standing with us.
I live right down the street from the Freedom Tree, which is located in the area where the Palmer Plantation used to be. And it is under that tree where the enslaved people of that plantation were finally told that they were free. And whenever I'm passing by, either going out, coming home, I try and make sure that I glance over and give some gratitude.
It was happiness once we were set free back then. With our descendants was so joyful, and they feel like it was a day of joy.
It's a day that reminds you to take control of your freedom, because if you give it to someone else, you can be left behind.
And tonight we slow down to pause and really dig into all that this day means for all of us across America.
That's right, Caitlin. You know, for some families, celebrating Juneteenth may be a newer tradition, but for other families, it's something they've been celebrating really for many years, generations, in fact. That's certainly true for people who live in Barrett, Texas. I was able to visit that small town in unincorporated Harris County. Just 25 miles east of Houston, Barrett is a small town you may have passed unaware of its rich history.
It sits right next to Crosby. So you've got a black town, a predominantly black town, right next to a predominantly white town. And we never really had any racial issues.
Cousins John and Malcolm Barrett grew up here. Their great-grandfather, Harrison Barrett, founded the community in 1875. He'd been enslaved until Juneteenth.
After the emancipation, Harrison Barrett began to purchase land. Once he purchased that land, he found his parents, his siblings, and he brought them all here, giving them a land, and that's pretty much how it all began.
Starting with just 7 original family houses, Barrett today is home to some 4,000 people. There's a community center, school, and churches. But one thing hasn't changed: Barrett's big Juneteenth celebration, which doubles as a big family reunion, celebrating emancipation as their ancestors did here more than 100 years ago.
After 1865, they began that Juneteenth celebration every year. It was serious. They were free. The enslaved people were now free.
Everybody in Barrett celebrated Juneteenth. Every house you passed by had a pit smoking for Juneteenth.
This year, they postponed the gathering because of COVID-19. The Barretts preserved their history in this small museum filled with family photos and artifacts like this scale and bag of cotton.
The artifacts that's there remind us of how they made it over, how they came to where we are right now.
John and Malcolm know they're fortunate to know so much about their ancestors. It's why they come back to Barrett often to share that legacy with future generations. I learned so much out there, and I want to also let you know that more than 3,000 new homes are expected to be built in Barrett in the next few years. When you think about it, that's pretty incredible. Land that started with 7 homes, now home to hundreds of families. Really incredible. Well, still ahead tonight, we're going to explore the issue of reparations. Did you know that billions of dollars has already been paid out to some Japanese Americans and Native Americans? So some are asking, what about African Americans? We'll explore that issue coming up. Plus, the dollar amount economists say they would owe, many might shock you. Isaiah has that story coming up next.
It means that we gained a hard-fought freedom. It means that it's recognition that we really are citizens here in this country, and we should not have the hardships that we currently have. And so, to me, Juneteenth is a recognition of, listen, we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go, and it's going to take all hands on board.
I realize that we must do the best we can with what we have to make people aware that Juneteenth is a catalyst for everybody.
Welcome back. Since the death of George Floyd, Americans are willing to approach an old conversation: reparations, payment for past injustices. But there's a segment of the American population, taxpayers, who say, why should I have to foot the bill for my ancestors' mistakes? We decided to talk to 2 experts about reparations and the likelihood of us getting it here in America. We have seen in the past where this country has given reparations to Native Americans. They have given reparations to the Japanese for internment camps. Why not Africans?
Because granting reparations to African people does not support the narrative of global white supremacy. Right. It requires them to not only own their wrongdoings, but actually have some form of apologetic nature around it, some form of desire to reconcile that, and it's clear that they don't have that desire. It's clear that they absolutely do not wish to propel us or set us up in any way on some kind of economic base that could potentially give us any form of economic power over the structure that is in place right now.
Dr. Winbush, when we take a look at reparations, Obviously, it takes mathematicians and a think tank to come up with a dollar amount. What would be reasonable or equitable in a situation like that?
If you look at the Accra Declaration in 1994, where a group of African sociologists, economists, psychologists, medical doctors who probably did the most comprehensive study of reparations, their figure looking at colonialism, the extraction of minerals out of Africa, such as mahogany, oil, gold, diamonds, and somewhere between 50 and 75 million Africans to the so-called West, their figure was $77 trillion. That's everything. So we're talking about enormous figures. I've often been asked by white folks, they'll say, well, where are we going to get all this money? But, you know, a few weeks ago for a stimulus package, I saw the House and Senate pass a $2.3 trillion, you know, so-called stimulus package that Black folk got just a little bit of in a matter of 2 weeks. So, you know, and I think that shows a lack of understanding of how money works in the world. So we're talking about, in this country, probably 8 to 10 trillion. Robert Johnson, the former head of BET, says he wants 14 trillion, which works out to about $350,000 per person.
We've been here before. And in the democratic process, there's nothing wrong with conversations. And they try to make it seem like this huge undertaking or milestone. But at the end of the day, it's a conversation. And in California, they recently passed a bill a couple of days ago to form a task force to discuss the possibility of issuing reparations to African people in America. And again, that's a discussion. Even as police reform is discussed around the country, it's a discussion. When are we going to get concrete policies? When are we going to have concrete change? When are people going to use their power and positions and platforms to make concrete moves as opposed to just having discussions? I mean, technically, we're having a discussion right now. We're technically a task force right now, and you're using your platform to do that. But we're talking about senators and lawmakers and congresswomen and congressmen who want to have discussions, and it's time we move past the discussions.
What you do is that you have a revolution when you have a core group of people and people who are willing to sacrifice to achieve a certain goal over a period of time. And reparations has been a marathon. It's not a dash, you know, and I think we're going to win the marathon.
So the question is now, how do you feel about reparations? That's the only way to keep the conversation going. Speaking of reparations, we're going to tell you about the history of Juneteenth, coming your way next.
And just seeing the movement, it just seems different this time. And I just wanted to be able to come on. I said, we got to do something today. And I just felt like I'm making phone calls, I'm calling senators, but I needed to be seen today. I just felt different.
Well, Juneteenth is widely taught in Texas schools, but not in other areas of the country, as has been very clear when you go online. Check on Twitter. We saw, for example, this sports writer in Utah asking people to retweet if they had never heard a word about Juneteenth at any level in school, racking up comments like this, saying, I honestly thought it was something new. I had no clue what it was, sadly. And this user saying he'd lived in 5 different states, including Texas, but was never taught a thing about Juneteenth. Well, this week I spoke with a historian and educator about how history classes are constantly evolving.
I don't see how we can ever come together without an accurate or more accurate history of being taught.
Historian Dr. Gerald Horn is the John J. and Rebecca Moore Chair of History and African American Studies at University of Houston.
I've published over 30 books ranging from 1492 to the present.
He believes Juneteenth was widely taught in Houston because it happened in our backyard. Up until now, curriculums would often focus on regional subjects so students could connect and understand the community in which they live. But in recent years, the internet has elevated all of us into a global community. Textbooks just can't keep up fast enough. The recent protests created a worldwide conversation that in turn elevated Juneteenth to new audiences. But that alternative way of sharing and discovering information comes with a new, dark challenge for historians.
How do we keep history from being inaccurately documented or manipulated by fake news and some of the efforts that we do see truly happening, particularly online?
Well, that's the $64 question.
He points to 2015 when publisher McGraw-Hill Education rewrote textbooks after a family from Pearland pushed back on African slaves being referred to as workers.
And we need more of those kinds of initiatives. Teachers groups and PTAs, parent-teacher associations, get more involved in terms of the inspection and scrutiny of textbooks. They need to be busy 24/7 indefinitely, because trust me, the opposition definitely is busy 24/7.
Who are the opposition?
Well, I don't think it's any secret that in the United States of America, you have very hardcore, hardline fringe organizations. They're hardly passive, they're hardly asleep at the switch.
Are you seeing what you feel is the right kind of change or growth when it comes to bringing in diverse voices to be part of the process of documenting history that is then taught?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think there's been considerable progress with regard to the studying of Black American history over the past half century. But I still think we're lagging behind with regard to Native American history. There are those in the indigenous population who feel that they were not discovered. History is rewritten all the time. We cannot begin to talk about coming together as a nation until we're talking about a more accurate version of the history of this nation.
Dr. Horn says that the current and growing pushback against Christopher Columbus being taught as having discovered America could well be the next big change that we see in history textbooks.
All right, Caitlin. Yeah, really good story, really good questions there. You know, while it seems more Americans are definitely educating themselves about Juneteenth and what it means, we're seeing a lot of companies do the same and also recognizing it in terms of a paid holiday for a lot of their employees. So far, more than a dozen top brands we've learned are offering their employees paid time off to recognize the momentous day that means so much to so many here in America. Google, Lyft, Target, JCPenney, Nike, and the NFL, just some of the companies that are already committing to changing and recognizing it as a holiday. But the question a lot of people still have, can that change make it all the way up to the federal level? Coming up tonight on our special, I speak to a former Dallas Cowboys player who is also making it his mission to have Juneteenth recognized nationally. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. As we mentioned, some local congressional leaders right now are pushing to make Juneteenth a federal holiday, but they're not the only ones. In fact, a former NFL player, a former Dallas Cowboys player, is hoping to do the same. I spoke with Greg Ellis.
You know, when you look at it, to me, Juneteenth needs to be on the same level as the Independence Day, the 4th of July date here in America, because I look at it as America's independence from slavery when you really think about it. And it's even more so because our ancestors who did so much to get this country where it's at, well, we still live here in this country. And for us not to have that day that at the federal level that's recognized as a national holiday, I think it's really a disgrace. And I think right now, making it a national holiday will send a message out that the country does agree that Black lives indeed do matter.
And you're behind a push to recognize Juneteenth as a national holiday. Tell me what specifically you've been doing.
And I have a stage play. And so I put the stage play together now about 3 years ago. The play is a call to action to educate people about why Juneteenth should be a national holiday. And also the play is another tool to show people the systemic racial issues that we've been dealing with for hundreds of years. You will be able to discover some of the origins of those things within the play. One of the big moments is that the master in this play, he doesn't call his slaves the N-word. He refers to them as eagle chicks. And the reason for that is the master realized that all people were made to be big, strong eagles, right? but he said we have to convince the slaves to think like chickens. If we can continue to have them think like chickens eating out of our hands, then we'll have happy, productive slaves. And so today we have to realize we need more of us thinking like eagles and not settling to be thinking like chickens, if you will.
Again, that was Greg Ellis speaking to us, and a reminder that his play is streaming online tomorrow night, so gather the family if you would like to and watch it. For now, that does it for our special on Juneteenth, Erase the Hate.
And you can see all the stories you saw in this special and our past Erase the Hate specials on fox26houston.com.
All right. Well, don't go anywhere because we have the show coming up next, The News Edge at 10. But we do want to say before we go, happy Juneteenth.
Juneteenth is everyone's opportunity to celebrate what the country was and to acknowledge that we are those enlisted to make sure it's never that again, to emblazon it in history, just as we do the dark past of the Confederacy, and to move forward with the country on the basis of our true values and our true character.